You ready to go? Sure. Great. Okay, it is 6 o'clock. I'd like to get this meeting started. We have quorum. Thanks to everybody who joined us in person today. First item of business is to approve the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Jenny, second?
Second.
Eric, second? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? We have one person joining us online. Anna, can you hear us? She there, Rosa? Okay. Well, we have quorum regardless, but let's look out for her because she was thinking she would tune in. Okay, so I'll hand it over to, now that the agenda has been approved, I'll hand it over to Ally Rhodes with the department to talk about future board items and tours.
Hello, there we go. New equipment, folks. Hey, folks, Ally Rhodes, Director of Parks and Recreation. On your agenda, I'll just call out that we have no meeting in December. We appreciate that very thoughtful conversation, and I know just for our team, it gives them significant hours back in December when we didn't have a lot of business, and hope you all enjoy that time off. Flagging again, so last week, the City Council and Planning Board hosted that joint public hearing I had mentioned around considering service area expansion into Area 3 during this Boulder Valley comprehensive planning process. They now meet individually tomorrow night, the Planning Board, and Thursday City Council to discuss that individually. And so those are pretty big conversations happening this week. The only other thing I'll just give you a heads up on is that across the downtown area, both the city and our partners, there's a lot going on for Winter Wonderland. I know there is the parade this weekend, and all through December, there are events to celebrate our small businesses downtown, and we partner with the Downtown Boulder Partnership on lighting and activities and encourage you all to get downtown and support our small businesses.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else? Anything else? Okay, great. So we're going to move into public participation. This portion of the meeting is for members of the public to communicate ideas or concerns to the board regarding parks and recreation issues for which a public hearing is not scheduled later in the meeting. Tonight, there are a number of folks who have signed up to speak publicly, both online and in person. During this public participation time, the public is encouraged to comment on the need for parks and recreation programs and facilities as they perceive them. All speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Depending on the nature of your matter, you may or may not receive a response from the board after you deliver your comments. The board is always listening and appreciative of community feedback. Rosa, will you please, if there's any additional presentation you need to make for guidelines before we welcome the first speaker? If not, we can move on to our first person.
Yes, we will move to our first person. Alex Veltman, please.
And just as a matter of procedure tonight, we're going to start with the folks who are here in person, and then we'll move to the online folks. Alex, thanks so much.
My name is Alex Veltman, and I live in the South Boulder neighborhood. I've watched the October 28th PRAB meeting and read the 2022 Master Plan update, as well as the 2015 Aquatics Feasibility Plan. And I want to start by saying that I'm impressed by all the thought and effort that has gone into assessing and improving our rec centers in recent years. My primary issue is aquatics, though we use the rec centers for a variety of things. Swimming has been important to me and my family for quite some time. I was a swim team member, lifeguard, triathlete. I taught swimming to children and adults, and I currently swim nearly every day with my wife and neighbors at the South Boulder Pool. Like a lot of Boulderites, we enjoy a variety of athletic activities, but when we moved to Boulder, one of our primary concerns was living in walking distance to a pool. Running, hiking, skiing, biking, etc. are all important, but as we get older, injured, have parts replaced, I firmly believe that swimming is the key factor for aging in place with a low-stress exercise. Having read the master plans and watched the recent meeting, I can tell you that most everyone involved is aware. I can tell that most everyone involved is aware of the benefits and the popularity of swimming to our community, including the increased pressure on usage. The plans I've read are full of amazing ideas for improving and expanding aquatics opportunities. What I worry about is what happens when the rubber hits the road and budgets are limited. There's a subtle implication, especially when reading the fiscally constrained and active alternatives, that a plan to demolish the South Boulder Rec Center may not include building a new pool. It all depends on what happens with possible bonds, of course, I understand that. But if aquatics ends up being fully redirected to East and North Boulder, or even a large natatorium further out, people like us in South Boulder will be forced to drive to East and North Boulder to compete for parking and lap lanes with swim teams, classes, serious athletes, and many thousands of other health-focused swimmers. Aside from the increased carbon output from more driving, you are also bound to lose a lot of community members who don't, won't, or shouldn't drive for one reason or another. Neighborhood socializing in the pool, hot tub, and sauna are possibly underrated, and low-stress exercise for our aging population would be a sad loss if a pool was left out of the final plan. I would be happy to help work on raising community awareness for bonds and other issues going forward, but I didn't want to let this opportunity pass to remind you how important a South Boulder pool is to our neighborhood. Again, thank you for all your work on this and your patience tonight.
Thank you very much. All right, next person. Rosa, do you want me to just go down my list, or do you want to just call the people? Yep.
As I'm trying to multitask here, I just want to ask our audience to withhold applause so I can get through through all of our participants. Thomas Lindahl.
Good evening. I'm Tom Lindahl. I'm representing the Bill Bauer Park. I came in April and we managed to get the program rolling again, but we've stagnated since August, and it seems to be language in the contract between us and Play Boulder. So I want to talk a little bit. I'm sure you know the history of the park. It was originally dedicated in 2014, but we ran out of money before the interpretive display could be built. So we being the Military Officers Association, want to build that display, and we're prepared to fund the project. We've been working since August with Play Boulder, and we've got the first phase contract done with DIG, but we're struggling with the language to continue with Play Boulder because we depend on donations in kind for a lot of military veteran projects. More than 50% of the known cost of Arleigh Burke Park were donations in kind, and it was probably closer to 80% because there was a huge donation that never got recorded, and that was transporting a 16-ton acre across the country from Philadelphia shipyards to Boulder. At any rate, we have already given Play Boulder the cash for phase 2 of DIG's contract, and we're waiting on this language. And we've started another cash raise, and I want to start doing donations in kind discussions with contractors. And basically, they're along the line of, would you sponsor in whole or in part a portion of the monument or the interpretive display? And there are 5 portions. There's cement supply, cement flat work, a plaque, which is kind of specialized tool and die. Then there are trees and other shrubbery. So those are the people we'll be going out to. We'd like a list of the currently approved contractors, and also a list of rules or a process for getting any uncertified contractors certified to do work for Parks and Recs in Boulder. So that's what we're here asking for tonight. And I appreciate your support on this. And, you know, we really got support last April, and we're looking to get the ball rolling again, hopefully in time to collect donations from people my age who have required minimum distributions they want to distribute. So anyway, thank you for your time, and good night.
Thank you.
I'm going to call John Boylan, please.
Hello, my name is John Boylan, and like a previous speaker, I'm just going to read to you. I'm going to talk to you about South Boulder Rec Center, just as he did, or SBRC, and its importance to South Boulder. I'm a member of what we call the Reimagine South Boulder Rec Center Citizens Group. I've been going to the SBRC every day, or almost every day, for decades. One of the main user groups I see is retired folks. Women and men, spry to slow, good health, not so good. Many of them I see day after day. Some use the aerobic machines, others the weights, others take classes, but maybe the most numerous, or so it seems to me, because it's what I most like to do, is swim, the swimmers. There's the gentleman who was a doctor in Vietnam, which is something to think about. The woman who made her mark in Southwestern archaeology, the physics and engineering profs, atmospheric scientists, and more, all in their so-called golden years. And they swim laps to stay healthy. They swim laps to extend their lives, but it's more than that. When SBRC was shut down for COVID, many of them shifted to the Louisville Rec Center, and they've told me what a fantastic facility that is and everything, but how it just doesn't feel neighborly. The folks don't get to know each other there. They arrive, they work out, swim, whatever, and then they leave. In contrast, at the SBRC, there's a vibrant community feel, strong friendships that have developed solely because of that facility. And it's not just around the pool, it's throughout. People hang out, catch up, plan activities together. And so despite the condition of the SBRC, these folks have come back to that location, and they're happy to be back. Obviously, you're probably aware Fairview High also uses the pool. The kids show up day after day. They fill the locker rooms and bleachers with this raucous chatter that's hard to hear over. They go through monster workouts that have really paid off. Fairview's had some of the best swim teams in the entire state. You probably know that too. So think about how important this is for teenagers. They learn the value of exercise, teamwork, commitment, devotion to their teammates and goals. They're not isolated. They're not on their phones. They're present in the moment and face to face. So the point is, for so many residents, the SBRC is a key part of what makes South Boulder a wonderful place to live, grow up, grow old. And now the city's evaluating SBRC's future. The Reimagine SBRC group, of which I'm a member, aims to collaborate with the city in this effort. Several of us spoke about this to council earlier this month, and we got good feedback. Council member Adams noted it's going to be expensive. Of course, we realize that. And we want to help develop the funding approach. Other council members and the city manager were very favorable in their responses. And actually, Council member Folkerts even mentioned problems she had with a survey that was recently used in the Future of Rec Centers project. The city has determined that the existing facility has reached the end of its life. In addition to funding, our group is working on some conceptual plans for a new full-service SBRC. We want the existing SBRC to last as long as possible, including with the pool. And we look forward to sharing ideas on a new and improved SBRC for the current and future generations. Thanks.
I'm calling Miss Yvonne.
Okay, getting started now. Okay. Hi, I'm going to stick to my script so I can get through in 3 minutes. My name is Yvonne Castillo. I live in the Table Mesa neighborhood. My husband was Alex. We live 2 blocks away from the pool. The reason we picked this particular home, we bought it in May, was because of the ability to walk to the pool. I'm 57 years old. I learned to swim later in life. And honestly, it's really the only exercise that keeps me active and pain free. I've got chronic back pain and other issues. But it's not just a recreational activity for me. It's really a lifeline to me having a healthy life, quality of life, being able to get to the pool without getting in a car. It's a really important facility. I use the pool 5 times a week. The only reason I knew about any of this happening was I overheard a woman in the locker room talking to some other woman about the potential demise of the pool in the new plans. And when I learned about that, that was just a few weeks ago, I started educating myself, reading the materials you have online, watching the hearings like my husband did, and starting to talk to people at the pool. Every time I swim, I see people in the hot tub and say, "Do you know about what's going on with the pool?" Inevitably, 99% of the time, I have blank faces looking at me. They do not know what's going on. So there are a lot of people in the community that use the pool on a daily basis, just like I do, and don't know anything about what's going on. Most of these people are just like myself. We're not necessarily athletes, but we use the pool on a daily basis. Many of these people, as the other speaker said, these are seniors. I said I'm 57. A lot of these people are my age or older. Of course, the Fairview students. And if we lose the pool facility, we're all going to be forced, and woe is me, but forced to get into a car. I know the city of Boulder, a priority is being climate friendly. We don't necessarily need more greenhouse gas emissions in our atmosphere. We do not need to be getting into the car when we have a perfectly good facility that hopefully can be renovated. But it's just going to be more traffic congestion if we have to go to north and east. So I hope that that's being considered as well. And unlike the athletes who use these pools, if we're going to north or east, what I'm concerned about is we're going to be 3 to 4 people per lane. People like me, seniors, we're older. I'm not senior, but I'm older. Me circle swimming, it's a very challenging situation, and that's obviously what's going to happen if we're forced to use the north and east centers. So I understand you're in a difficult position. I understand this is all about money and funding, and that's really difficult, and you can't commit to a future facility having a pool. But I would ask, please, if you could reconsider potentially re-exploring retrofitting. I understand the architecture firm that it says it's exceeded its life, but I really think that retrofitting could be a serious alternative to complete demolition. I work in the architecture industry, engineering industry, and there are very innovative firms who can think about long-term design solutions that could work. I understand there have been pool leaks, et cetera. But my hope is that you all will reconsider a complete demolition and potentially saving some money. We've got a big hole in the ground already. We've got pool lanes that are available. And so my hope is that maybe we could revisit that potential solution instead. However, if demolition is just unavoidable and that's the direction that you all decide we have to go, I do urge that you prioritize a pool for the new facility. So for me, I'm here today because I wanted to tell my story. I want to be part of the solution. I want to help in any way I can. So if I can help pass the bond, knock door to door to try to get people's support, I'm here to do that, and I will volunteer to do anything that is required to get us to that place. I do thank you for your time. Thank you for the 3 minutes. Apparently you're over, but thank you for your time and appreciate you helping us navigate through this really complex process.
Thank you.
Finnegan Connolly.
Good evening. My name is Finnegan Conley, and I'm a member of Reimagine South Boulder Recreation Center. I have been going to South for the past 15 years, and that is how old I am. South Boulder Recreation Center is important to me, my family, and the community. When we were young, my mom used to take us to the Halloween party at South. My tennis career began at South in the racquetball court. I now play on the Fairview High School team. On super cold days, we would play in the gym with basketballs or volleyballs. We would play line tag. My mom would never let us have a Nintendo or an Xbox. We had adventures outside or down at South as a family, seeing who could do the best cannonball off the diving board and warming up in the hot tub. In fact, last week, me and my brother Eddie were practicing our freestyle at the pool. I have also had many birthday parties at South, swimming and renting out the old daycare for pizza and cake. There was always leftover pizza to give to the staff, Lauren, Casey, and Barb. Now that I am older, I use the weight room with my dad and friends. It is a great place for us to go to hang out after school, train for sports, rehab from injuries, and distress from school. Finally, I work as a ninja guard with the city of Boulder. It is very difficult to find a job as a 14-year-old in Boulder. Getting to work is an inconvenience for my parents because I am able to ride my bike. I appreciate learning new responsibilities and keeping the little ones safe as they have fun on the equipment. I am planning to take the lifeguarding class at South in 2025 to continue my career with the city. I know that you are considering what to do with South Boulder Recreation Center as it is an aging facility. As you discussed the survey results tonight, it would be great to maintain the facility, to stay open, and think about the future of the facility and how we can make it even better. South has provided a very healthy and safe childhood for me. I hope someday I can have cannonball contests with kids of my own at South. Thanks for letting me speak tonight.
Thank you.
I'm calling Jimmy Connolly.
All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the Prab. My name is Jimmy Connolly, Finn's brother, and I'm honored to share my story and support for South Boulder Recreation Center, not just for me, but for the entire community. As a young adult, South Boulder Recreation Center was one of the first places where my friends and I found a sense of independence. It was a place we could go on our own, our parents knowing it was a safe place for young kids to exert their energy and stress. At South, we stayed active with the community and strengthened our connections with each other to our neighbors. It was a place where innocence and adventure blended, and it was a place we felt like we belonged. I worked as a lifeguard at South for 5 years, typically the opening shift. One memory that stands out was a cold winter morning when I arrived to open the pool. A group of regulars who had been swimming at South for years were waiting outside, bundled up, smiling despite the chill. As I let them in, they shared stories about how they'd formed lifelong friendships in that very pool, meeting each morning to swim laps and support one another. Seeing their dedication and the joy to this place brought them made me realize that South Boulder Recreation Center isn't just a facility, it's really a lifeline for so many. Sometimes I would only work for an hour at 6 a.m. before high school, only making $10.60 an hour. Those early mornings weren't really just for the money. They were about building relationships. Seeing a familiar face each morning and becoming part of something greater than myself is a really rare thing for a 15-year-old, in my opinion. Through this job, I learned responsibility and developed a deep appreciation for the people of South Boulder. This facility has shaped my childhood and my transition into adulthood. It provided me and my peers with a sense of security, community, and purpose. And now, as I look to the future, I want nothing more than to see South Boulder Recreation Center thrive for the next generation. It's more than just a rec center. It's a cornerstone for our community and a place that has given so much to so many. So as you discuss the future for the South Boulder Recreation Center, I hope you consider its profound impact. And let's work together to ensure it continues to be a source of strength and growth for years to come. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
I'm going to call Weston.
Hello, I'm Weston Bennett, and I'm 8 years old, and I go to Bear Creek Elementary. I go to the South Boulder Rec Center all the time with my friends. We play all types of sports like in the gym, like basketball, soccer, and football. My friends and I would love to have an after-school basketball class in the winter. I hope you will think about adding that. When I walk in the gym, I see the warped wall. me and my friends can't use it because it doesn't fit in the ninja room. I hope you can build a bigger and taller ninja room. When you are building the rec center, I hope you can build a full-size gym, a bigger and taller ninja room, and a pool for me and my friends to swim in. That was my speech. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Very nice.
Chrissy Breskel.
Hi, sorry, just need to pull it up. Hi, my name's Christy Breskel, and I live in Table Mesa. And I've learned that my family is apparently not the only one who moved there because of the rec center. The schools at the rec center is exactly why we moved to Table Mesa. Anyway, I'm here tonight on behalf of the Reimagine South Boulder Rec Center community group also. And I wanted to speak to you because I believe the South Boulder Rec Center's neighborhood lap swimming and indoor basketball gyms are critically important to Table Mesa and the broader South Boulder community. There are many reasons for this, but I just wanted to share one example that's personal to me and my family. One of my kids is now out of elementary school and is a middle schooler at Southern Hills. Because Southern Hills is next door to the South Boulder Rec, he stops by the rec regularly on his way home from school. Sometimes he goes with friends, sometimes he goes alone. Sometimes he goes to open gym to practice basketball, and sometimes he goes just to the open gym just to play around and have fun. I recently saw him playing with a group of kids during open gym, but they weren't playing basketball. They were actually on one end of an open court playing some apparently hilarious game they'd made up that appeared to be a version of Foursquare with jumping. But they are getting exercise, building human connections, and having fun in an unstructured, unprogrammed environment. And needless to say, I was grateful. But South's basketball gyms are important for pickup basketball too. Thanks to South's pickup games, my son's met new people and learned to play with kids and adults he doesn't already know. And because he's young and small, these were some tough lessons. But I'm grateful because he's gotten to do all this in a safe neighborhood space next door to his school. This is just one example of the many reasons, in addition to how important, as we know, the lap swimming is to the neighborhood and the community, why I'm excited for the opportunity for our group to collaborate with Parks and Rec to improve upon what's already great about the South Boulder Rec Center and to reimagine what more it could become. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alan Smith.
Good evening. My name is Alan Smith. I would like to address the board tonight on the Bill Bauer Park and the interpretive garden project therein. I have lived at 689 Hartford Drive since 1988, and Bill Bauer was a neighbor of mine. As a former member of the Park and Recs Advisory Board, I worked on getting this pocket park established over 10 years ago. Many people in this neighborhood were involved in advocating for this park, and we have good memories of working with the department as the project was brought to fruition. Since then, I have observed how this park is utilized every day by my neighbors, and we collectively appreciate the hard work of the Park and Rec staff who maintain the park. My neighbors and I are aware of and support the plan to create an interpretive garden which will keep the memory of Bill Bauer alive. And for anyone that doesn't know who Bill Bauer was, he was a World War II pilot that was part of the Doolittle raid. So he had a very big impact on our country, and his military service should be recognized, but he was also very involved in the community here in Boulder. And I think those are all factors that brought in as to why his name was selected to be memorialized in the park. But right now, all we have is a sign, on Table Mesa. Anybody that goes to the park if they don't know who Bill Bauer was before, they're not going to find out. So, so that's why I'm advocating for this interpretive project. And as a retired Army officer and commander of the Boulder's Veteran of Foreign Wars Post, I can assure you the military community in Boulder is behind this project. We appreciate the efforts of the department has made so far, and we strongly urge continued movement and results. Pending any questions you may have, I yield back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Chair, that is all the participants for in person. I do have Irene Lee on the line that I'll call.
Great. Sure. Yeah. So we'll put Irene on hold for a second.
That's great.
Yeah.
Good evening. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Ryan Bennett. I'm a resident of South Boulder, and I'm here on behalf of the Reimagine South Boulder Rec Center Advocacy Group. Our group has a fundamental belief that having a full-service rec center in South Boulder is a pivotal part of a healthy and dynamic Boulder community. And as a result, we have two real core priorities. The first is to reimagine the South Boulder Rec Center to become a true community hub for health and wellness and connection, inclusive of all residents in the community. And the second is to ensure that we can maintain the current South Boulder Rec Center until a new South Boulder Rec Center can be completed. We've assembled a group. We have nearly 200 people that are passionate, engaged on this topic, that are part of our team. We've organized ourselves in a way to ensure that we can channel and amplify our collective efforts to be a really productive and positive influence on this process as we move forward. And I will say we've had many productive conversations with Parks and Rec staff, with other stakeholders in the city, and we're really excited about the opportunity to continue to contribute in a really positive way as we go forward. The other thing I'll say in the last few months of being part of this group, the thing that has really stood out is the passion. You know, I spend a lot of time, I probably consider myself a power user of the South Boulder Rec Center. And to hear the stories of the residents in our community talk about the South Boulder Rec Center has had a really big impact on me. And hearing those stories that have happened over the last 50 years, whether it's a neighbor who's now grown children learned to swim at the South Boulder Rec Center, or a resident who totally transformed their health by making a trip to the rec center a daily part of the routine, there's so many stories to hear. And it honestly makes me reflect on my own experiences getting to go shoot hoops with my kids, Wes, who was one of them who just spoke, and also barely surviving bar classes with the instructor Janelle alongside my wife. I have many positive memories of my time at the South Boulder Rec Center. And so it's been awesome to hear others from our group share their personal stories and passion around the rec center. I think it's been tremendous to see the impact that this rec center has had over the last 50 years. And I would say I feel really fortunate to be part of this advocacy group to help encourage and be a positive impact on ensuring the South Boulder Rec Center can have that same impact over the next 50 years. Thank you very much for your time and look forward to partnering with you all going forward.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go to Irene. Is she still online?
Irene, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Okay, great.
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for your time. I have lived in South Boulder for 16 years, and it is where I've been raising my family of two sons who are now aged 11 and 14. My kids have also grown up swimming and playing at the South Boulder Rec Center. And like some of the young people who've spoken here tonight, my kids have gained independence by walking or biking to the rec center on their own and enjoying the many activities that are there. And like others who've spoken, I swim at the rec center largely because it's one of the few things that I can do, also due to injury. And I'm going to share just one short story. There's so many things that the South Boulder Rec Center provides. My kids went to Bear Creek Elementary, and one of the many hallowed traditions is the lip sync performance. And one year, my son and his group of friends were able to use the dance studio at the South Boulder Rec Center to rehearse their dance moves and their lip syncing. And it is just one of the many wonderful things that the South Boulder Rec Center can offer. And if we were to lose it in any form, that would really be a shame. Now, I understand that remodeling and retrofitting the rec center would cost money, maybe more money than it would to tear down and rebuild. I have not read the plans. It sounds like a lot of people have. But this notion that it cannot be kept and renovated seems penny wise and pound foolish to me. Again, I understand that it is largely due to cost, and I too would be very happy to do whatever community building it would take to raise the bonds to keep the rec center as it is with a pool. We all have to understand that the rec center is, not a money-making business. It costs a lot of money to fund and run and maintain. And it is worth it because it provides a really priceless resource to our community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Irene. Rosa, are there any other folks that are listed?
That was it. Thank you.
Any other folks in the audience who thought they signed up but didn't hear their name? Okay. So now is a portion of the meeting where we can address the comments we've heard and also get some feedback from staff as well. So we'll do that. So I'd like to pass it over to Allie Rhodes first to address any of the comments that you heard.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd encourage the gentleman, I believe it was Mr. Lindahl, if you want to email me, I'm the Parks and Recreation Director. We can follow up with you offline. That's probably the quickest way to stay in touch. And if I'm sure Tina and Mark have your email, I can get it and we can just give you a status update.
Thank you.
And then I guess since I'm unmiked, I'll just note, we just are, these stories, I'll admit, I got teary-eyed several times. We believe as deeply as you do in the power of parks and recreation and community wellness hubs to make communities thrive. I started the Halloween carnival that the Connolly boys went to. I managed the South Boulder Rec Center. I just was maybe passing around a picture to some of our teammates. Our best friends got engaged in the pool at the South Boulder Rec Center. So I am grateful that you all understand we are doing our best and the project is underway. And there are some incredibly smart people in the room. I know we're going to give an update on community engagement tonight. And thanks for coming on this journey with us.
Thank you. I just wanted to say personally that, and I'll pass it off to other members of the board if they have comments as well, but I just want to say that, this is a really tough subject. I think that South Boulder Rec is one of those really treasured facilities in the city. It's been around forever. And as a South Boulder resident myself, I feel very strongly that I want a presence there in South Boulder in some form for recreation for generations to come. And I just cannot tell you how much I appreciate the engagement from this group, and also how you've adapted your approach to the realities of the situation. It went from safe South Boulder Rec to reimagine. And I think that's a reflection of your listening. And you're part of this process with us. And I really hope that all of you continue to be engaged in this process as it moves forward. Because I know for a fact that the feedback you've provided and the engagement you've provided us has been really helpful. And everybody here is listening, staff are listening. And so everything you're saying and all of that time you're putting into it is worth it. I wanted to just clarify one thing, and Allie, remind me, when the facilities person spoke at the last meeting, did she not clarify that it's possible we can, if there's a new facility put there or something's put there, that there might be a chance that the facility that's there remains during the transition?
Correct. That is an approach some folks take in new construction. I think our community can see that in practice right now with the new Vista building, where it's being built separate. The existing facility is open and the new facility is being built elsewhere on the campus. And so I know that as part of the project and evaluating potential, you'll certainly hear more about this, but we are looking at the entirety of the site.
Yep. Thank you. Anybody else? Comments? Questions? Jenny? Oh, Sunny?
Well, as a 25-year South Boulder resident, I just feel really proud and lucky to live in South Boulder after seeing and hearing all that you had to say. So thank you for showing up and for sharing your thoughts and your memories. And I just have a lot of hope. So much intelligence and big hearts out there. We're going to do some great stuff together, I'm sure. So thank you.
Jenny?
I just also wanted to say thank you to the community for being engaged, especially to our young participants tonight, Weston and Finnegan and Jim. You guys did an amazing job. We love listening to our up and coming residents here in Boulder. So thank you all for that. And I wanted to mention to Alan and Thomas that I am almost the official liaison between Play Boulder and the PRAB. So I'm willing to, that should happen in the next few weeks officially. So I'm willing to meet with you anytime, sit down and talk through any struggles you may have or any information you may need between Play and Parks or Bill Bauer. So please feel free to reach out to me directly and we can put something together. Thank you.
Any additional comments from members of the board, including those who may be joining us virtually? Okay. Moving on. So that concludes the public participation portion of our meeting. We do have a separate section later in the meeting about the future of rec centers, but this is the portion where community gives feedback to the board. So that is now concluded. The next item is the consent agenda. And as a reminder, the consent agenda includes the approval of the minutes from the October 21st and 28th meeting and special meeting. And I wanted to clarify also that when we approve the consent agenda, if anybody has any updates or amendments to the minutes, you would do that when we ask for comment as part of the approval. So I will ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda. Motion by Jenny.
Second, Anna.
Anna, second. Thank you. Any discussion on the consent agenda? And as a reminder, this is the portion of the meeting where you give feedback on the approval of the minutes and any of the updates from the Parks and Rec team on the packet they gave us.
I just had one question about the vacancies that are coming up for PRAB. Does PRAB see any of those applications, or is that just done by council and staff?
It's an entirely a council-led process. The applications will be, well, I don't think the applications are posted with the packet of information. Rosa, do you remember when city council discusses the appointments, are the applications included?
Yes.
Okay, so they'll be available in that information. And I know from the past, and you might remember yourself, you might start hearing from folks wanting to know more about what does it mean to be on the PRAB, and we appreciate your volunteerism there. I know a lot of you have spent time with past board members before you started, but then have helped recruit folks. So, but the decisions are up to council. You might get consultations from folks about the role and decisions.
Any other comments, feedback on the packet? Okay.
This is Anna. Wait, this is Anna.
Oh, Anna, go ahead.
Hi. I just wanted to thank the team for putting together that benchmarking. I thought that was really helpful to look at the comparison of the private facilities and the other municipal facilities that are around Boulder, and compare the fee structure for like the daily entry as well as the percentage of budget that their municipality provides them to their rec center. So I thought that was a pretty clear takeaway for me that we need to get more budget from city council and the general fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Any other feedback from the board? Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the consent agenda? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the consent agenda is approved. That means the minutes from those meetings are also approved. So you can send them to me for signature. Thank you. We have no action items tonight. Our first matter for discussion is the final Boulder Parks and Recreation 2025 fee adjustments presentation from staff.
Thank
So
you.
I'll hand it
Thank
back
you,
over to
Mr. Chair. And I'm going to, while Jackson and Stacy get organized here, I just want to introduce this item and thank you all for your questions, your concerns last month. You shared a lot with us about fees and we appreciate it. And actually, Anna kind of set up the perfect segue there by referencing the Ballard King financial analysis from the 2022 BPR plan. And the reality is that if we want to maintain our service levels and keep up with cost escalation, we do have to increase fees. And I know the team is very thoughtful about that. And, you know, council did affirm the fee policy with the approval of the 2025 budget. I think in a perfect world for all of us, recreation would be free to everybody. That is not the world in which we are living. And so we must recover costs. Adult must recover full costs so that we can allocate those subsidies to those priority populations. So I wanted to thank Jackson and Stacy and the teammates in recreation who supported pulling together information for you for tonight's meeting. You asked a lot of great questions about what other communities are doing and funding levels. And so tonight they're going to share some information in response to that. And I just thank you for understanding that we wish we were in a more perfect world and we're not. And so here we are. And thank you all for your hard work. So Jackson Height, our Business Services Manager.
Thank you, Ali. I know you all know me, but I'll introduce myself for the audience. I'm Jackson Height, Business Services Manager. Thank you, Ali, for the great introduction. We do have copies of the presentation if you'd like to follow along. So Stacy's going to pass these out. Really just wanted to provide the context. If we look at the history as far as what the PRAB has done, we started out in 2022 with the approval of the department plan, which really had an entire theme dedicated to financial sustainability. One of the recommendations from that was to develop a fee policy, and last year PRAB approved that fee policy and created a comprehensive fee schedule. This year, we spent several months with you developing the 2025 budget, which the PRAB and ultimately City Council approved. And within that, we had a $500,000 placeholder for planned fee increases, just knowing that our expenses were going up. As has been shared with you, all of the recreation fees are set by a city manager rule. This is called out in the Boulder Revised Code, section 838. So that is the process that we follow. Just a reminder as far as the context, this is the last 6 years of budget. You can see that in the green is the earned revenue that the Recreation Activity Fund generates. In the blue is the expenses. We really have tried to be balanced as close as possible every year. Our emphasis is we aren't here to make money, we are providing community recreation. And I think you heard many of those stories tonight as far as the benefits that that provides to community members. On the bottom line, you do see the consistency in the general fund subsidy that remains at about $1.6 million per year. On the far right, we did have a placeholder for that $500,000 in earned revenue, and that is really why we need to adjust the fees. So that is what's before you tonight, is to basically close that gap and talk through it. With this, we have talked several times about the general fund subsidy. This is just a reminder that the general fund subsidy goes towards programs that have been recommended by the community with the 2014 master plan as well as the 2022 BPR plan. These were both statistically valid and included community input saying that these were the areas where tax dollars should provide the greatest support based on the level of recreation provided to community members. Last month, we did hear several questions from you, so the next few slides focus on responses to that. There was a general question as far as what is our cost to provide those services. You can see that the cost to provide our services is very much in line with the proposed fees that you do see. For the adults, we have proposed subsidizing the youth and seniors as well as volume-based discounts. So these costs are based on 24 actuals. You will see, next slide. I'm sorry, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Another question that you all had was focused on financial aid and what the eligibility was, what the process was. So this is really just a high-level overview. Our recreation team does a phenomenal job of administering this program. And if you make 60% or less of the area median income, you qualify. There's a question as far as what that means, and we base it off of household size, so you will see that in the top right-hand corner. In terms of the process to apply, there are multiple different avenues to do so. Any recreation center or online through a convenient link. The forms are available in both English and Spanish, and then we have several of the documents that are pre-qualifiers to be able to apply. And this really helps ease the burden for community members who are trying to get eligible for this program. You will see that the membership does include access to all 3 recreation centers, our outdoor pools, and then the Boulder Reservoir. And then we have identified the scholarship program, which provides up to 50% off per program, and that's $400 annually. We are proposing, just with the cost escalation of most of our programs, increasing this to $500 annually in 2025. And the programs that really benefit from this, or community members enroll in the most, are aquatics for swim lessons, gymnastics, and camps. So I think that that's a huge emphasis on the youth engagement. On the next slide, we really just look at the overall visitation to our recreation centers in the financial aid program. So the chart on the right really shows that we have over 4,000 members enrolled through September of this year. You can see that that number has really increased year over year. We thought in 2020 we would hit a high point just with the number of unemployment claims with COVID, and we have seen year over year growth since then. On the left-hand side, we do provide some general information about overall visitation. Just comparing 23 to 24, we have grown almost 27% in terms of enrollment, and that is correlating very nicely with the visits increasing 25%. We do see that adults are our largest users, followed by youth and then seniors. There were several questions about the differences in funding mechanisms across different municipalities. Attached to your packet was the Ballard King analysis. This was completed as part of the 2022 BPR plan and was done by an outside financial consultant who really specializes in parks and recreation agencies. I think there's a lot of key takeaways here. I would really encourage you to look at the executive summary, but it is showing that Boulder is doing several things right, but there's always opportunity for doing it better. And I think that we are very excited to continue to work on the recommendations identified in the Ballard King analysis. The key takeaway is the funding mechanisms really differ between every municipality. Boulder receives significantly less general fund, but does have dedicated funds in terms of property tax and sales and use tax. Another question really focused on the cost escalation. We've tried to identify what CPI has been for the metro area since 2020. It's averaged at 5.2% per year. That is very much in line with what our anticipated fee increases for 2025. But I did want to highlight, we have seen fee increases across the board that are in the double digits. So there's a few abnormalities here. It's very hard to do an apples to apples comparison year over year, especially from 2019, which was a pre-pandemic year, and then everything that we have built back. I will also note that the chemicals seem high. Scott Carpenter Pool was closed for construction that summer, so that truly isn't an apples to apples comparison, but did want to provide a general baseline as far as where we were at and recognizing that our dollar doesn't go as far as it did previously. There were several questions around retention and attrition of our users anytime we do a fee increase. We looked at the last increase, which was from 22 to 23. And at that time, we actually grew visitation and revenue 20% and 25% respectively. I think that that year we had about an 8.5% fee increase. So if you look at it, the usage was actually a bigger driver than the revenue if you factor in both revenue and usage. And then our last fee increase prior to that was in 2020. I think that we all know that the world shut down in March of 2020, so it is very difficult to look at any apples to apples comparison year over year with that fee increase. But we have looked back at our historical usage, and generally we retain 70% of our users over a 9 to 12 month period, which is very much in line with other recreation centers, both public and private. Market comparison is the next 3 slides. There was some information requested for how we compare to other municipalities. We really broke this out for daily usage, monthly passes, and then the Flatirons Golf Course. And then we did check with our surrounding jurisdictions. Most agencies are updating their fees every 1 to 3 years, and most expect price increases in the 5 to 10% range for 2025. This is very in line with our overall recommendation. So I'm not going to bore you too much with this slide. I know it was in your packet, so you had a chance to review. You will see that for the daily drop-in, the yellow is our current rate, followed by our proposed rate, and then several of our competitors are listed. What we are seeing is many private clubs are going out of business, just the increased costs and not having enough members to support that. Or on the converse side, where we really see it is on the monthly. Several clubs really focus on a high volume, but low utilization. So an example is Crunch Fitness and Planet Fitness. They really sell those $15 a month memberships, get 30,000 members, and hope that not everyone that is there at the same time. So it is very different in terms of what's being offered. And you can see that just with our funding mechanism, we are at the top of the range for public agencies, but still significantly less than private clubs within Boulder. When we get to the golf course, we see that our 9 holes are very comparable to market rate, whereas our 18 holes are below market rate. We do look at this across multiple different golf courses on the Front Range. All of these are public courses, and beyond just the individual holes or rounds of golf that are being played, we did look at the annual passes, value plans, and then the other accessories that are required to play golf. So this is an area where we are still generally in the lower 50% and would like to capitalize on the growth that golf has seen over the last few years. Another area that Prab had questions about was about the Boulder Reservoir and access to the Boulder Reservoir. Staff is currently working on a reservoir management plan that will come to Prab next year for their review. We are hopeful that the recommendations from this plan will inform the 2026 fee setting. And then we did hear significant feedback about the small watercraft permits. All of this has been shared with the project team with the key themes of affordability, ease of access, daily rates, ANS, and then overall general facility operations. We do expect in 2025, we will continue selling small craft permits after that May date that we had stopped selling previously. And we'll just continue until they are sold out so that there is still availability for people who are late to the party. Finally, we've really emphasized the change management aspect of this. There will be updated printed materials, digital materials, one-on-one communication with our impacted user groups, and then there is a winter sale to really incentivize people over the next 6 or 7 weeks to lock in today's rates prior to fee increases. Our hope is that daily drop-in users are purchasing punch passes. This is a significant value, about a 15% cost savings for residents. And then really promoting the monthly and annual memberships. Anyone who purchases prior to the end of the year gets 2024 rates going into 2025. Finally, there was some general concern about how the public would know what the best value is. We are working on a training plan for our staff, trying to help them understand what products people would get the most value on based out of their general visitation, their plans for working out, which facilities they plan to visit. So we're very excited to share that with our team and make sure those questions are answered at the front desk as well as online, and then any phone calls that we receive. So with that, just wanted to wrap up and say that in December, we would go through the city manager rule process. This is for non-codified fees, meaning they aren't in the BRC. There is a public notice process in the daily camera. And then our intention is for fees to take effect on January 1st. We did hear the PRAB's interest in the long-term financial strategy. So in Q1, likely in January, we would return and provide a broader update as far as that project, expected timeline. And then we've identified what the city has included in the scope so far. And I think that you've heard this before and just wanted to reiterate that this is in the works and staff from across the city are currently working on this project. So with that, that's the end of the presentation. I will take any questions.
Any questions from the PRAB?
I got a question, I guess mostly on process here. forgive me, I don't know what the city manager rule is and what that means. And I just want to understand what our role, PRAB, is on, there's no motion here, right? So this is just a briefing about the fees, right? So maybe you can explain that process a little bit.
Yeah, that's correct. Within the BRC, we looked at what the PRAB's role is, and there's nothing to take formal action on the overall fees. The interpretation is with the approval of the budget by both PRAB and City Council, there was that $500,000 placeholder, so we took your feedback to include it. The city manager rule is basically a public notice in the newspaper for 15 days. If a sufficient number of people respond to that with issues, the city manager can take any feedback and revise the proposed fees, or it can choose to adopt the fees as published, and then those take effect after 15 days.
Okay, great, thanks.
Anna, Jenny, Sunny, anything? I had a question about the public comment process. So this is more of a question about how the city does its public comment process generally. So when the federal government gets, notices a rule, there's this long period of time where comments are submitted and then they review those, and then somebody puts it in the federal register, hey, we're going to stick with the rule, or we're going to change it for this reason. How long does the public have to comment? What impact does the public comment really have on, does the city manager's office review every comment? Like, do they change ever? Just want to give the public a sense of that there's a process here and how long they have.
There's a 15-day comment period within the public notice. It will provide 2 staff contacts. One of them will most likely be me. The other will most likely be the city manager's office. Within that, then after the public notice period has closed, all comments will be reviewed by the city manager's office. I can tell you from the 22 to 23 fee increases, we did not have a single public comment. And from the 2019 to 2020, I believe we had 1 public comment.
Okay. And how do you guys publish those again?
It's in the Daily Camera.
Okay.
I know it's a very archaic way of doing it, but that is the process that was laid out.
We could also consider including the notice in the e-blast that goes to 45,000 people, right? So there's electronic methods.
Yeah. And do you put them on your website at all?
Yeah, the proposed fees will be on the website. Going back to the last slide, the rec guide will be updated when that gets published. We will have signage up in all of the 3 rec centers. There'll be notice provided to all current pass holders, letting them know of the changes. So multiple different touch points.
Great. Thank you. Any additional comments based on those questions and comments? Go ahead.
I just wanted to say I appreciate all the hard work that was put into the plan for the fee increases, and I understand the reality of the cost escalation, but as I've mentioned in other meetings, I believe that we need to find different ways to create revenue streams so we don't have to continue to raise fees at this rate. From what we saw in the packet tonight, I think that our fees are high comparatively to many other private facilities. And given the choice of our aging infrastructure or one of those other private facilities, I would choose a private facility based on the cost. So I think that we should, again, I just wanted to reiterate the fact that I know I've done it before, but I think there has to be different ways through philanthropy or sponsorship or advertising or budget adjustments in order to not charge the residents additional fees. Because I don't think that this level of increase will be sustainable. I think people will stop using our system if the fees keep increasing at this rate. And I think that would be a terrible thing. So especially, again, like I said, with the aging infrastructure that we have and potential bond measures coming up and all the things that we're currently have on these agendas. So just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that reiterates what we saw in the Ballard King analysis. Fees are already very high for Boulder.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, we do have Anna with her hand up.
Anna.
Yes, I agree with what Jenny said. I know people that go to other surrounding municipal rec centers because of the costs being so much lower. And they've said that they feel like the facilities are newer. And I was just wondering, sorry if I missed it. Is there something that's going to be like physically posted about the fee increase at the rec centers, like at the front desk or something like that?
Yeah, within the next 2 or 3 weeks, we should have signage up at all 3 rec centers, Flatirons Golf Course. Reservoir, we don't capture as many users at this time of year, but we will make sure signage is up out there as well.
And is there like a QR code or somewhere that they can provide feedback on a form or somehow?
We have a meeting tomorrow to discuss that with staff. I'm happy to share the idea of a QR code just to provide any feedback as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any additional comments from the PRAB?
Yeah, I just, it doesn't sound like we're really being asked to weigh in that much on these fees, but like, as I said in the previous meeting, I do also feel like we're squeezing people here for these extra $2 and a $12 drop-in rate at a pool that's failing. To me, until we improve these facilities, I don't think we should be increasing the rates on them. And I know there's this $500K shortfall, but we need to find other ways to cut expenses than trying to continually going out to the public and raising the rates. Because I think it's kind of like what's happening in the ski resorts, right? The daily pass just keeps going up and up every little year, and then people are stopping. You just can't afford as a family to go ski anymore unless you have the pass. But I just feel like these are partially subsidized by the city, by our taxpayers. I think it's our duty to keep these fees low and to let as many people as we can in. I really don't understand why we got rid of the non-resident rate and we're charging everyone the same, because I live in Boulder, I pay the taxes in Boulder, I should get a discount for that, rather than in something like 25% of our users are from outside of Boulder. So I feel like if we're gonna do a fee increase, we should be squeezing them because they come here. And honestly, like Anna said, I go to Louisville, it's cheaper and it's nicer and the pool's better. That's where I go on Sundays with my kids. I think that's the reality. And so we can do this and we can try to raise the fees, but I think there could be a drop off in users. And if you want young families who are not subsidized because they make too much and they're not seniors and they're not in the financial aid, those are the people that are going to go away and look at the value. And I just don't think the value is there. So that's kind of where my position is. I realize that we don't really have a say in this, but I just want to give the feedback as a PRAB member on that. So
I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, are we ready to move on to the next item? Did you want to provide any other additional information on this item?
I don't. Thank
Okay.
you, though.
Okay. Okay, so the next item is matters from the department, future of recreation centers, planning analysis and engagement window 2, summary.
While they get situated, I'm going to introduce the folks who are joining us up on the dais. They are representing a very large project team that I think they're going to share with you more about. So you've met Darren Wagner, our senior landscape architect and the project manager for the Future of Recreation Centers project. And then Mira Thiessen is she is with Perkins Will, and she is our, are you the principal on this project? I should have double checked that. Yeah. So, we're really glad to have these folks here to talk about this project. We are very eager to be planning for the next 50 years of Boulder's Parks Rec Centers.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having us back, and thank you to the community members who both spoke and are sticking around to listen to this. We really do appreciate it. Also appreciate Mira being here, and in a moment she'll introduce her full team, as Ali mentioned. We wanted to use this opportunity tonight, especially since our consultants have come in person, to introduce you to them to you, because this is such a big project, and they'll be continuing on with us into what we've been calling phase 2, which is the renovations for East Boulder Community Center. So it's a good chance for just some introductions there. And then we also want to use this opportunity to summarize what we've heard to date from the public, and describe how that input is informing next steps in the process. So our agenda is pretty simple. I'll just start out with a brief overview. Was there something, Mr. Chair, you wanted?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Anna's hand is raised. I just want to make sure she didn't have something to say. Okay, just wanted to make sure. I mean, she may have just left it up. Okay, carry on. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. So I'll just give a brief overview to resituate us and where we are in the project. Mira will summarize what we've heard in the most recent engagement window, and then I'll conclude with next steps. So this is something that you'll probably continue to hear us say over the next 5 or 6 months as we finish up what we've been calling phase 1. So this Future of Recreation Centers project is really meant to inform 2 things. And one is the renovations of the East Boulder Community Center, which have been funded, as well as galvanize conversations about a citywide strategy to fund other major improvements at our centers that are currently unfunded. So we're using both of those as sort of our guiding lights and wanting to make sure that we're looking citywide at our system of recreation centers and understanding what the community is really looking for in those to address even some of the comments that you've just made, so that we can see how well we can address those in the renovations at East, and what we can't, then what could we then look to fund in the future at our other locations. The other thing that we just want to keep front and center as we move through this process is that community engagement is one of our core pillars in terms of the inputs that we use in our planning and engagement processes to make some of these recommendations moving forward. And we're going to talk almost entirely about that tonight. But we just also wanted to reiterate that the other inputs into the process are coming from other citywide guidance around sustainability, equity, and resilience, which is why in part when we look to the renovations at East, that a lot of that is driven around sort of a deep energy retrofit, as you may have heard us talk, as well as some other past planning and assessments that have been done to guide us in this process. We're also using this current process to gather more information and bring that to bear. And so we're looking at the sort of quantifiable data around levels and types of use, and comparing what we hear from our community in terms of the activities that they want to see at our rec centers with other peer agencies, so that we understand how do we compare to Louisville and others, for example. But then also, as Ali mentioned, we're looking at the constraints, the conditions of our buildings and the sites around them, so that we can, as we look to sort of fill those gaps that we've identified, we're doing that in a realistic way, so that we're not setting undue expectations for ourselves or the community in terms of what we can achieve. And part of that information gathering is around expected funding levels and what that might look like. So we're really seeing this as a holistic process, trying to bring a whole lot of past planning, past data, past assessments to bear with current up-to-date information and community priorities. So we shared quite a bit more about the engagement process last month. And just to remind us where we are and how we've designed the engagement strategy for this phase 1 project in particular, it's a series of what we called engagement windows. And the first was really more than a year ago, talking just with people at each rec center, listening, understanding, what do you love, what do you value about these rec centers? And we've called that engagement window 1. We've just wrapped up in September what we've called engagement window 2, and that was meant to build off of those community values to understand how those play out in terms of the actual activities that our community wants to do at our rec centers. And that's what we're going to summarize for you tonight. What that will then lead us into is further conversations about what some of the improvements and recommendations are for each of our centers. So how do we accommodate those activities at our different centers? And how do we dream a little big for some of these bigger processes that are unfunded, so that we can continue to build off of this community momentum and desire and inform those other steps around the citywide funding strategy. So the fourth engagement window will be in the spring, where you'll sort of see the phase 1 process around this future of recreation centers come to a conclusion as we bring out some of our final draft recommendations that we have gathered and assembled through this process for the communities to sort of review and for the PRAB to review. At the same time as we're bringing online with Perkins and Will's expertise and community input to date, some design concepts for the renovations at East, so that those can get going. And then as we just want to continue to reiterate that there will be continued community conversations around how we fund these outstanding improvements in the other locations. Throughout all this, we always just want to remind ourselves that through citywide guidance around sustainability, equity, and resilience, that we have in our BPR plan some identified populations that we've said are important, especially to make sure that we engage and lift up those voices, because oftentimes they're not as comfortable or don't feel as empowered to engage in typical engagement processes. So we've made efforts to date to engage these populations, and will continue to do so as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to let Mira summarize what we just heard in the engagement window that was just concluded.
Thank you, Darren. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight and present to you, to PRAB, and to hear the members of the public and how much they love Boulder Recreation. It's really enlightening for us, and we're really happy to be part of the process here. So just wanted to spend a little bit of time telling you about Perkins and Will. On the next slide, it just shows our team, our entire Perkins and Will team. So this is just Perkins and Will. I have two members with me tonight, Brandon Lucero and Kat Lapine. Brandon is our senior technical coordinator, and Kat is an interior designer, but they've been helping synthesize data, helping with community outreach and everything we've been actively involved with thus far. But we also have regenerative design advisors and data analysts on our team, and they're going to help us really understand how to work through all the different scenarios for how to improve East Boulder and how to make sure it's of the greatest benefit to the community. So we also have electrical, mechanical, aquatics consultants, as well as Ballard King on our team as well, to continue the conversation. So an engagement window 2 overview. So for window 2, we completed it at the end of September, but we started out with the What's Up Boulder event. Members of our team were there, along with Darren and her team, hearing everything that the public had to say then, and also engaging with the Post-it engagement boards, which were started at that event and then moved to each of the community centers for further engagement. So that was collecting thoughts through kind of a dynamic medium, and really just one question is posed there. It's what do you really enjoy doing currently at your Boulder Rec Center? So really fun, engaging exercise. And then that was followed by the online questionnaire, which was open from September 7th through the 30th. In the next slide, we'll go over some numbers that we saw as a result of that questionnaire. And then lastly, the September 26th was a focus meeting with some of the community members, and I believe that was dedicated to South Boulder. Right.
Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry. Let me go back a slide. The meeting on September 26th was actually one where, yes, we did invite in folks from Reimagine South Boulder Rec Center. And it was also with folks, nonprofit organizations, community organizations that either currently or would like to engage with our rec centers. So it's both.
So this next slide just shows a little bit of what the reporting out has been for window engagement 2. The questionnaire responses, we got over 3,200 separate responses, which is great. Historically excluded groups, there were over 500 respondents of those groups within that 3,200 number. And then comments on the interactive posters, the Post-its, 386 individual comments, which we have a few quotes from in a slide coming up, but really the What's Up Boulder attendee engagement was part of that direct process. And one of those photos you see there was one that we took while we were attending, and more than 500 people is what was reported out for attending that event. And then total community touch points thus far with engagement 2 is 4,000 plus. And then also wanted to mention the years of youth engagement regarding Parks and Recreation in Boulder has been 10 plus years for your team to be engaging with the youth. So in our summary findings, one of the big things with community values is physical health. Nearly 80% of the people said that was the most important value to them. It's there at the bottom. just promoting fitness through individual and group opportunities, indoor play and training and recreation activities. Lifelong wellness from youth to older adulthood, also showed up very highly, and we heard a lot of that tonight from our speakers. So it's been reinforced tonight, I think, by people who have attended this meeting. And then also good governance, taking care of existing facilities to protect their usage long term. So this slide represents the interactive poster responses, so the post-it exercise. And then the word cloud kind of gathers the most heard responses, or the most responded to items. And you can see that aquatics, fitness, and mindfulness and wellness kind of came out at the top. And those corresponded directly with the questionnaire responses we received as well. So there's a lot of similarity between those that answered the questionnaire and those that may have also participated in this interactive exercise. So a few notable quotes from the posters. The question was, what's your favorite recreation activity? And in the purple box with the arrows, we're emphasizing that, mostly we saw aquatics and fitness related comments, and those outnumbered, a lot of others that were handwritten on those Post-its. Swimming and pool space, warm water rehab, as well as open fitness classes were a lot of what we saw there. But, also interesting things in that community building aspect, student hangout space. An indoor walking track is something the city of Boulder currently doesn't have, so that we did see that. But then also just general support for classes, weight room, dancing, aerobics, that sort of thing. So that's what was shared with us. So this next slide is the summary findings on the questionnaire that went out online. What 3 changes would you most like to see at City of Boulder Rec Centers over the next 10 years? And this is all respondents. So this is all 3,500 plus respondents. So highest was more opportunities for in-demand activities at 57%. And then indoor options to support year-round opportunities for outdoor sports and other activities at 51%. And activities and facilities that better reflect my interests at 35%. So those were the top 3 changes that people had responded to in the online questionnaire. And then, diving down a little bit further than that, related to indoor recreation activities, the 3 most important activities from all respondents was indoor fitness, indoor aquatics, and indoor mindfulness. So that was similar to what we saw, on the Post-it exercise, which is great that those similarities are showing up. And then key takeaways for the entire Boulder community. More specifically for indoor fitness activities, strength training and stretching, cardio equipment, and fitness equipment were the key activities called out in that category. For aquatics, lap swimming, leisure swimming, and competitive swimming for both practices and meets were highlighted as some of the more important items. And then under mindfulness and wellness, classes, physical therapy support, massage, and other body work were also noted by a lot of individuals. So those were the key takeaways from getting specific on those 3 items. And then specific to the youth community members, nature, aquatics, art, safety, opportunities for play, and the importance of food, which I remember that as a kid, that, that's always something that attracts you and makes you want to stay somewhere, right? If that's an offering. Independence and places to hang out, social events, places, where they can just be with others in a very comfortable place, that third place, if you will. There was also mention of sensory needs and having a sense of independence, as well as the affordability question that's come up, and, emerging trends, very much attuned to equity and sustainability in the conversation for the future of South Boulder Rec Centers. So then lastly, how the input's being used. So What we'll do with this input is identify demand for indoor recreation activities, and this is throughout the engagement windows. Identify needs for improving facilities and services, guide benchmarking with peer agencies, which we're undertaking that currently, and then inspire further community conversations this winter with the third engagement window that Darren will describe next.
Thank you, Mira. Yeah, so as we've described, we wanted to give you a little bit more of a preview into our next engagement window, also for community members to hear as well. So we have talked previously at the last meeting about the strategy we call micro engagements. And so we will start those as early as the first week of December. And those, as we line things up, they're starting to look like, showing up on a Tuesday night at East when a lot of the Expand programs are happening, and there are a lot of participants and families coming in and out of the center, as we want to make sure we engage people with disabilities. We are, thanks to Sunny, working on scheduling an opportunity to come and join the Mesa Elementary School community at just a coffee and chat. We have a couple of meetings coming up with the Boulder Valley School District to talk about how they want to engage their stakeholders. There might be additional opportunities. We have a meeting on December 6th with the city's Youth Opportunities Advisory Board, which is a group of high schoolers who weigh in on citywide issues that affect their well-being. Members of our team are going to participate in some gatherings at our Agewell centers, the one at East as well as the one in West Boulder. As we've talked with members of the Reimagine South Boulder community rec center group, we are also willing and interested in attending any of their meetings or gathering with them. And that's just a smattering. We are as we're kind of finalizing the details around these micro engagements, might find yet another opportunity. But our goal is to, again, get out there and speak to those who might otherwise not feel comfortable joining a citywide event. As I said, we have a partnership coming up, a partnership meeting with BBSD, where we'll really meet with their leadership and their staff and coaches and so on to understand their demand, their needs, so that those get integrated into the process as well. This idea that we have coming up on January 15th of Game Night is an interactive workshop that we're designing where we will be strategic and transparent about the types of participants that we engage and invite to that event, so that we have a real diverse set of conversations, so that we can talk about what we've heard so far in engagement and those top activities and ideas that have emerged, and how we can start to sort of locate those across our 3 centers and think about how those are distributed, as well as dream up ideas about what we might want to see in terms of improvements at South and North, so that we can continue those conversations in future phases. So it's going to be a fun and productive event. And then at that event, we'll also have video production staff there filming and interviewing participants, and as well as a graphic recorder who will be drawing visual notes of the discussion and ideas that come up, such that both the video and those posters can then be posted online and put in each of the centers, for another opportunity for anyone coming and going in that 10 or 11 day period to add to, comment, reflect, so that we get an even broader set of input. And then we hope to close the engagement window at the end of January so that we can really pull that all together into an initial preliminary set of recommendations for each of the centers that we would then bring back out in the spring for the community and PRAB to review and discuss. So that's our overview. We are very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
I have a question.
bet.
Can you tell me a little bit more? The game night workshop, you said you're going to be strategic about your invitees. Can you tell me more about are you planning on inviting, youth or both or families or
Yeah.
business stakeholders? I mean, what does the strategy look like?
Yeah, you got it. So we are confirming that and hope to send invitations out in mid-December. We are hoping that it's a cross section of both individuals as well as representatives of, again, nonprofits or community partners that are a part of our rec centers. And so, for example, I'll just be honest. We've also talked to members of Reimagine South Boulder Recreation Center and want to make sure that they have representatives that feel welcome and engaged, as well as youth that are willing and able to come. We are willing to offer stipends and other underrepresented community members, so that we're hoping that each sort of table group has an opportunity to hear from different demographics, in one discussion, so that we can kind of build a robust set of recommendations. Yeah.
Anna? Did you have your hand up, Anna?
Sorry, I was muted. That was my fault, not Rosa's fault. I'm happy to hear that you're gonna do more engagement with families and children, because it seems like the feedback that you've gotten so far is pretty adult, senior oriented. So I think it would be valuable to hear some of those other voices. And then I was just wondering, for kids to participate in that game night or January 6th, like how can they find out about the stipend? Like I could share that at my kids' schools at University Hill, which is the Title I school with the bilingual school, or Centennial Middle School.
That's a great suggestion. I'd love to follow up with you offline for that. So we're trying to work on the messaging around the stipends. I think what's been more successful in recent youth engagement workshops is that it's actually an opt-out opportunity. So we had previously been offering stipends as a, let us know if a stipend would be helpful to, make this worth your time or possible in case you have to cover childcare or other things. And we're realizing that can put people in an uncomfortable position. And so we're looking at flipping that and saying it's an opt-out option. And, we're looking at trying to, because this is such a complex set of conversations to have, we're not intending for the game night to be open to anybody and, and like with 500 people there, because it would be hard to manage a productive set of conversations. So, we're trying, that's why I say strategic, and we're trying with our supervisors at each of the centers. They're helping to identify, some families and young people that might be interested. We're also, as I mentioned, going to the Youth Opportunities Advisory Board and seeing if any of their members would like to come and participate. So what we also want to do, though, Anna, as we finish up designing the event, is to make sure that if someone is coming with their children, that it feels comfortable and exciting for them to be there, but also that it's an opportunity for them to share their feedback too. It's not just, here, go play in the corner and we'll talk to you in a couple hours.
Okay, thank you.
Anna.
I'll connect with you offline then.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
Can you share more about the BVSD engagement, and if there's anything percolating right now that you can share that's being discussed, or what you expect to be discussed at that meeting, and if anybody's allowed to come and listen or participate?
Oh, yeah. So thank you. We're meeting with the district this coming Friday to work on the details of this. Excuse me. And they've kind of requested an opportunity to just discuss directly with our consultant team what they expect or imagine their future demand might look like, what ideas they've already heard. And so that's intended to be,
It's a working meeting.
it's a working meeting. Thank you. Couldn't find the words. Yeah. So we don't have any concrete recommendations or requests that we could share at this point, and want to respect that partnership as we move through it. Yeah.
I had that same question. Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
I think you guys are doing a great job on engagement. I think, it sounds like you're really hitting all your bases on that. I think we discussed schedule a little bit at the last meeting about potential bond measure, when that might happen. And it looks like, I'm looking at these windows and the phase 1 and phase 2, and I'm just trying to understand, what the deliverables are and when they happen. And so, we're taking this holistic look at all our rec centers, but the first deliverable is really just going to be a plan for East. Is that right? The first thing to come out, or like what can we expect to see this spring? And then, I see 25 to 27 sort of, that's when we're going to, it just looks like it's a longer process than I had anticipated.
Okay, sure. So I will answer part of that question, and then Allie may have updates on the bond process. But no, the first, well, it'll kind of come out in tandem. So in the spring, what we want to have is, I don't know if you remember last month's presentation, Perkins & Will is going to help us develop some graphics, just high level diagrams of, okay, here's what we heard is most important from our community at each location. Here are the types of activities and improvements they'd like to see. And that will come with a set likely of written recommendations, because not everything translates into pretty pictures. And as well as some cost estimates. And so that is when, when we hear, for example, by that point, we'll have a much better understanding, a fuller picture, for example, of what the community is wanting to see at South Boulder into the future. And so at a very high level, order of magnitude cost estimating, Perkins & Will can help us then anticipate, okay, what might it look like if we were able possibly to renovate that facility in part, or if we were to build a new facility, so that we have some kind of WAG of what those costs may look like, so that both the graphics and the narrative and those cost estimates that come out in the spring will inform that bond process moving forward. So that is the piece that will kind of conclude phase 1, this citywide look. But then at the same time, we'll have some design concepts coming out for the renovations at East, so that the community can also weigh in on those and keep that moving forward. Did that answer your question, or Allie, do you want to add anything?
I can add just then the connection to the long-term financial strategy and ballot strategy. Is it possible to flip back to your timeline slide just to show how they will dovetail? So do.
It's coming. It's going so slow. We're almost there. It's a rehash of what we talked about.
You're fine. I'm not going anywhere. So if you look at the timeline for window 4, we will have the needs assessment that can build on those recommendations. So what I heard Darren say is that in the spring, we're going to have some costing. I'm looking at the timeline for the long-term financial strategy, and I think the note we should make ourselves is anytime we're talking on this topic, we should include that connection for you visually, and we can do that. But so the intention is that at the same time we're developing, then the community engagement on a ballot is going to begin in the spring. And so that's where we start talking to the community about, all right, here are the things that we're preparing. They're typically, and communities do it different ways, but sometimes there are community task force, sometimes there are community committees. There is almost always polling to get a general and statistically valid input from the community as to what things people are feeling an appetite for, because generally, you don't put something on the ballot if it's not polling at above 55%. So that's where you get a gut check from folks. Is there energy from the community for these things? And the intention then is that potential ballot measure language is going to council in the May-June timeframe. And so they are connecting. It's not going to be at a costing level that it is. I'm going to make things up, right? We've got a 62,500 square foot recreation center that has a 30,000 foot pool and right? We're not going to have that level of costing. And so that's going to be an interesting part of the journey if there is interest in funding recreation facilities with the 25 ballot, or does that wait for 26 when there is more defined costing and actual schematic design? So for example, some of our neighbors and in even the school district before, sometimes they go to a bond, they will have very detailed cost estimating for buildings. That'll be one of the policy choices we'll have to make over the next 2 years.
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question more for the public's understanding of the bonding process, but based on prior conversations, the bond itself would be a citywide effort, correct? It wouldn't be specific to Parks and Rec.
There are needs across the community that the intention is to package them holistically and thoughtfully, and so that the community can help prioritize needs across the community. So there are unfunded needs in transportation and in other city services. Public safety buildings have some significant deficiencies, our fire stations. And so the intention is to be holistic and thoughtful with the voters and with the conversation.
And so to follow from that, based on what you just said about if there's a need to provide more specific schematic design or cost estimates, would that push back the entire bond effort, or would there just be a one-off second bond issue for rec facilities?
So
I know
I will be able to answer that
crystal
question more
ball.
accurately in the first quarter. Right now, it's unknown. Is there a ballot in 25 that is about the deferred maintenance across the community? And then is there another ballot in 26 that adds amenities? And I'm making this up, develops Valmont City Park and helps us, get playgrounds up. There's a variety of policy choices that both our council and our community are going to have to make about how we move forward to make sure that we're great into the future.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other comments or questions based on what I just asked? Okay. Anna? Nothing? Okay. Okay, thank you so much. This is great, as usual.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, we're getting toward the end here. The next item on the agenda is matters from the board. We have two items. One is PRAB recruitment, and then the second is PRAB matters. So I'll start with recruitment. This one is a heavier subject or category than we typically have because of a few reasons. One is we have a lot of vacancies on this PRAB that are coming up, and I wanted to talk to you all about the process. I know that we had an item in the packet that kind of attempted to lay out the process, but I wanted to provide some clarification on that timeline and also just provide just an update on what our vacancies are going to look like. So I'll start with the vacancies. So we are going to have 4 vacancies on the PRAB that City Council is going to be filling. We're going to have Wayland's seat, which his term was going to end in 2027. So it'll be a 2-year-ish term filled in 2025. Eric's seat, Eric is finishing out Jason Unger's term, which ends next year. So the new term for that seat would be a 5-year term starting this next year. We've got Sunny's seat. You're finishing Tara's term, correct? And so her term ended 2025. And so it would be a new 5-year term. And then I wanted to let you all know that, on Friday, I handed in my letter of resignation from the PRAB as well. And the reason for that is because, as you know, I've been elected to the CU Board of Regents. And upon pretty significant reflection, I did not think that I could do both. Serving in this capacity, as a board member here, as well as serving as a brand new CU regent. And so I made the really, really difficult decision to step off of this board a year early. And it was a really, really difficult decision, but I think it was the right decision. But I'm hopeful that I can continue to work with all of you on Parks and Rec related stuff as a regent. I know that the department is already planning really exciting stuff with CU here in Boulder, and I hope that's not the end of the story. I hope we can continue that, and you guys know where to find me. If you have any CU related rec stuff that you want to run by and opportunities. But because I'm going to be stepping off of the board, just to clarify, I will finish out my year. So my year would end after the March meeting. So whoever replaces me would come on in April. And that's a year short of my term, my 5-year term. So whoever replaces me would be on the board for a year, similar to what Eric has done with Jason's seat. So with that said, we've got 4 vacancies, including mine. That's a quorum of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. And the timeline is in December 16th, I believe, is when applications open. The application window opens. The application window ends January 31st. So if you know anybody in the public, in the community who is interested in applying for a position, that is the 7-week window. City Council will interview candidates for these 4 positions in mid to late February for a week or 2. And then in March, they'll make their final selection. I wanted to make one clarification from the packet, which is that the application packets, as I recall, are publicly available. Is that right? The packets that are submitted?
For the members being considered, they are part of the council packet the night the council members are discussing their recommendations.
Okay. So they're not like available publicly before that meeting packet is released?
Correct.
Okay, got it. So as Allie said earlier, it's a city council led process. So we don't have any specific ability to review those applications, but you may get some outreach from city council about, some folks that have applied or whatnot. But that's the process. So are there any questions or concerns, feedback on that item?
So there's a 1 year, a 2 year, and 2 5 years.
Yeah, there's a 2-year at Wayland's, 2 5 years, and a 1 year.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So lots of opportunity. And in my personal opinion, this is the best board commission in the city. So, Bob Yates famously said, this is the fun board. And I agree with that. Former chair of this board. So, anybody who in the public wants to get involved with city boards and commissions should, consider this board because it's really great. Okay. So with that, we've got matters from the board. PRAB matters, which is where we just individually share stuff that's on our mind, or things we've done related to Parks and Rec business. And I'll open it up to the rest of the board. Anybody been doing anything that they want to talk about?
I have, as I mentioned earlier, I've been officially appointed to the Play Boulder board. We have a meeting coming up this week, our monthly meeting. And I think at that point, there's a couple of good initiatives that they have on their list. So I will make a note of what's brought at that meeting and bring it to January's meeting. So everyone has a clear idea of exactly the initiatives that Play is working on for next month. So Bill Bauer Park is one of them in the civic area and things like that. So I'll just get some clarification and bring that. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Jenny. Anybody else? Okay. I don't have anything to add personally, but I just want to say that I am always reminded how great, I know we have a lot of really interesting policy challenges right now with the budget and with fees and with the future of rec centers, but I think we have really great facilities and parks here. And I spent a lot of the past fall watching my son play soccer and practice soccer at Pleasant View, and just was reminded every time I went there how wonderful that facility is. It's so well maintained. You guys should be really proud of that facility. It's really great. I know there are some challenges with that site. I've now experienced firsthand the parking situation and the traffic situation. And, obviously we need to address those things, but I know we are, and we're doing it in a really thoughtful way. And that's just a phenomenal regional facility. And I'm really proud that it's here. And it's really great that it's here because if anybody in your family is playing soccer, it's one of the best facilities around. There's one in Aurora, there's one in Windsor, Fort Collins. And so there are only a handful of facilities like that. And so we really are lucky to have that. So thanks for keeping that up. Yeah.
Something I wanted to propose, and I guess this would probably depend on whether Sunny and Eric decide to apply again for a term. But I've heard that in the past, some boards will do a retreat kind of similarly to what council does, but not with an agenda so much, more of a relationship building retreat between staff and PRAB. And I think this might be an appropriate time to do it. If Eric and Sunny are going to run again, I think we should try to fit it in before before the next term starts. If Eric and Sunny decide not to run, then I think we should wait for the new board to come on. But I think that creating an opportunity for a relationship building between the PRAB and the staff might be really helpful to just more continuity between the two groups and our agendas and the way that we kind of manage our business moving forward.
Great. I appreciate that idea. Okay. Anna, speak now or forever hold your peace.
I agree that Pleasant View is a great facility. It's something that kids get really excited to go out and play on those fields because there's just amazing space. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay. I believe that is all for that item. The next board meeting is in January. As a reminder, we have no December meeting. Thank you to the board for approving that last meeting. I think that's going to be really helpful for staff. And so we've got a heavy docket, so to speak, in January. But with that, anybody else have anything they want to add, say? Okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you so much.